then we should be ready to go. Okay. Here we are. Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. Let's just do a quick sound check. Instagram, how's the sound? Can you hear? Just give me some thumbs up with some likes, if that's okay. Just hit the like button so that we can see that that the sound is working. As well, if you can let me know on Zoom, how's the sound on Zoom? Are we good? Are we good on the Zoom sound? Yeah, good. Okay. And as well, let me just check on Facebook to make sure as well that we are live and it is working. Can I just get, can people just let us know if the sound is working on Facebook? Yeah? How are we doing on Facebook? Anyone? Can you guys let me know what the sound is like? Okay, excellent. So it looks like we are ready to rumble. All right, so I think, Zach, you're the only one that it's not working for. So I think you might want to check or maybe kind of log out and log back in, or you can log in alternatively in through one of the other login options. Okay, but it should be working. I think it should be working. Okay, for everybody. Okay, so let's get started. Does everybody have the document with the Mishnah? It's posted on multiple places. Does everyone have the document? And if you need it, we can give it to you. Just let us know if you have the document. It went out on the Pirkei Avot group. If you're following with your own Pirkei Avot, it's easy to find. The only thing is that the Mishnayot are counted a little bit differently. Some do what's it called, chapter 3, Mishnah 8. Some people have chapter 3, Mishnah 10. But the beginning of the words are Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. That's where we're going to begin with. All right, so you're more than welcome to find it from there, and hopefully everyone can join us together. As far as hold on one second, let me just make sure that we are plugged in properly, and then you can let me know. Is a Facebook sound? They said it's a little bit low, or is it low on Zoom as well? Just make sure that we get this right before we start, so we don't need to change it again in just a minute. Do we have a problem with the sound on Zoom and on Facebook? Just make sure to let me know, and then we can hold on one second. I think I can. Is that better? Is the sound better now on Zoom and on Facebook? I think it should be a little bit better now. Okay, hopefully that fixed it. Okay, great. All right, so let's begin. Okay, we begin with chapter 3, Mishnah 8. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Dosa, would say, Kol sheyirat chet'o kodemet lechochmato. Anyone that his fear of sin comes before kodemet lechochmato, comes before his wisdom. Chochmato mitkayemet. His wisdom, it remains, it endures, it lasts. Okay, and on the other hand, kol shechochmato, but anyone whose wisdom kodemet liyirat chet'o, but the wisdom comes before his fear of sin. So in other words, he's wiser than perhaps he is pious. Okay, for someone like that, the Mishnah tells us that chokhmah en chokhmato mitkayemet. That wisdom does not endure. Okay, so we're being told effectively one idea, which is kind of doubling back on itself. So in other words, if you have that condition, chokhmato mitkayemet, then the wisdom endures. If you do not have that condition, then the wisdom does not endure. So the question that's asked by some of the commentators is, obviously, if you told me that chokhmato mitkayemet, that your wisdom endures, if you have this condition, so I already know that if you don't have it, by definition, the logic would indicate that if you don't have it, then obviously, your wisdom is not going to endure. It's kind of like saying, if you study before an exam, you'll remember the material. And if you don't study before an exam, then you won't remember the material. That's obvious. One is the opposite of the other. So we're being taught here something very powerful, and it's important that we actually get it right, because if we don't have the idea that sits behind it, then quite often we don't maximize what we've learned from the Mishnah. So that is the beginning of the Mishnah. That is the expression of the Mishnah. That's how we begin. But as anyone that's been to this class will know, we always first study the Mishnah, we read it out in its simple form, and then we actually begin going through the Mishnah. We pull up a couple of questions, and then we explain it. But before we begin the main part of the class, I'd like to just say that today's class is dedicated in honor of Rabbi Shlomo Farhi. Again, thank you so much. Leilui Nishmat Rachel bat Sofi Shafia, Rabbi David ben Rivka, Alav HaShalom Shlomo ben Rivka, for the Refuah Shlema of Rose Rezel bat Chava, Marco Mordechai ben Jamila, Yaakov Yisrael ben Chaviva, Benjamin ben Jun Esther, Rav Yoshua Yosef Pinto ben Zari, by Anonymous, and as well for Victor ben Chuta. So I just want to say that we are finding in this Mishnah, I think, something which is incredibly, incredibly important for what it is that we're going through right now on the streets of this city. So let's look at the Mishnah together one more time. So we're taught that the frame of mind that a person studies Torah from within needs to be from a place of yirat chet'o, of a fear of sin. So I need to be, when I'm thinking about doing the learning Torah, it has to be like that. I'm thinking, I'm afraid that I'm going to mess up with my mitzvot if I don't know what the law is, what the outlook of the Torah is. If I don't have that fear, what the Mishnah is telling me, it sounds like then my Torah is not going to stick around. Now, I don't know about you, but the way I see things, actually, when someone learns something or when they do something out of fear, oftentimes that actually ensures that the person will not remember it. So as an example, if someone has a teacher that kind of, berates the child all the time, they make the child afraid, the kid, as soon as he gets a chance to run away, he runs away, right? That's the nature of fear. The nature of fear causes someone to run away. So here we're being told that if you come into learning with fear, your learning is going to stick around. I don't think that, number one, I don't think that that's true. But I think, therefore, we have two questions on the table that will help guide us in our understanding of this Mishnah. Now, there's a very interesting line in the Gemara. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah on page 19, the Gemara says as follows: En adam lomed ela mitoch ma shlibo chafetz. A person only learns that which his heart desires. What does it mean it only learns that which his heart desires? It means that for a person to engage in learning, they have to be interested. If you can't find a way to make your Torah interesting, at least to yourself, right, then the chances of it sticking around, of you learning, are almost like they say, 0 to nil, like they say in England, right? It's very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to study and be able to get involved and be able to learn if you're not interested in the topic. If the rabbi or the role model or the teacher is boring or not relatable or whatever, you're gonna cut out. So the Mishnah over here is not saying that. It's saying that even if you find it interesting, that's not enough. And the question is, why is that? So the Gemara, when it says over there, En Adam Lomed, that's saying what gets a person to study, to learn. But there's a very different question when it comes to what gets a person to have Torah and life lessons that endure. And we speak a lot about this in all of the classes, because I think when someone is spending the time to study Torah, to learn, to grow, to develop, none of us wants to waste our time with some sort of short fix. It's, you know what, it's beneath us. It's a waste of time. Like, as an example, like if you want to lose weight, right? So you think you go to the gym and run as fast as you can and as long as you can, and then that's going to solve the problem? Obviously not. There's obviously a systemic problem here with regards to how you're eating, how much you're exercising normally. Going to the gym and running for 10 miles until you fall on your face, that's not going to change the way your body looks, the way you feel healthy, because obviously you haven't changed something in a real way. If a person is suffering with a breakdown in their relationship, to go out and buy a very expensive gift, that's not going to help the situation, because it's a short-term, shallow fix. So none of us who's here, especially in this class, which is supposed to be a workshop where we're working through issues in a real way, in a enduring way. So it's important to notice what the Mishnah is telling us over here. It's saying if you find the class interesting, that's great. That will make you learn. What will make it stick? Yirat chet'o, having fear of sin. So I asked you a question. It seems to me that the generation prior that walked away, or at least the parts of it that walked away, part of the reason was because they didn't find an enjoyment in their study, in their Torah, in their mitzvot. You know, there's a very famous line from Rav Moshe Feinstein. And, I've been hearing this line from Rav Moshe from the time I was a little child. They came to Rav Moshe Feinstein and they asked him, how is it possible that the generation that came after the war, they came to America, they came to the Lower East Side, they lost their jobs every Friday afternoon. They went to the boss, the foreman, and they said, I'm not coming in tomorrow. Tomorrow is my Shabbat. The guy said, okay, no problem. Don't bother coming in Monday. That's what it was like. People, they risked their lives to keep Shabbat. They risked their livelihood. And this was a time when it wasn't about luxury. It was about the necessities. They couldn't afford the necessities. And the government wasn't giving the handouts that the government gives today, where, you know what, even if you have no job whatsoever, you can live a very comfortable lifestyle living on the dole. I mean, we're financing laziness in this country. We're financing a spirit where people feel like I deserve and I don't have to work. And you know what, if I can make the same money staying home, why would I get a job? I mean, that's what's going on in the world around us today. Never mind where we are specifically in these few days. And we'll come to that in a little while. But at the time, you had to make it work yourself. And people would give up their jobs every week. And they came to Rav Moshe and they were heartbroken, the leaders of the community. They said, how could it be that the children of the people who gave up everything for Shabbat are now themselves walking away from and not keeping Shabbat? How could that be? And Rav Moshe answered something unbelievable. He said, because on Friday night, the ones whose kids are keeping Shabbat are seeing a different thing than the ones whose kids are leaving, are walking away from Shabbat. You want to know why the children of someone who gave up everything for Shabbat could walk away from Shabbat? He says, because Friday night, when the father came home, he stood up to make Yiddush, and he said in Yiddish, Oi. He gave what's called in Yiddish a krechts. Oi. Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid. It's difficult to be a Jew. Difficult to be a Jew. The kid heard, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that being a Jew is difficult. What did that ingrain in the child? Ingrain in the child this ratzon, this desire to run away from something that he was constantly being told was so difficult. Now, what I learned from that story, my whole life, was that if you could give everything for Shabbat and still not manage to communicate it, its importance, its value to your children, because the children felt that Shabbat was difficult, that it wasn't something that we loved, that we enjoyed, that was interesting. If we could not communicate that, then all of the efforts and all of the lessons and all of the risks and all of the misirut nefesh could be flushed down the toilet because the kid would not want to study. And that's what the Gemara is telling us in Avodah Zarah. If you're not interested, if you don't think it's good for you, you're not learning. But now Rav Chanina ben Dosa comes and teaches us, hold on. If you're not afraid of messing things up, if there's not an element of fear of seriousness, when you are looking at this mitzvah and thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I might get this wrong, and there might be ramifications. There might be ramifications to me getting it wrong, whether it's in this world or the next, in parnasah, in shidduchim, in education, in life goals, in happiness with my life, in feeling like I'm leading a meaningful life, whatever the case might be. If I don't have that, says the Mishnah, even if you got it in the brain, right? You didn't say, oh, it's a shmer, but you didn't communicate that if you don't do it right, there's ramifications and it doesn't stick. So I want to talk a little bit about this dichotomy. On the one hand, making Judaism feel exciting, loving, enjoyable. On the other hand, making sure that people understand the importance and the ramification between lomed and mitkayem, between learning and keeping. Now, I want you to imagine the following scenario. Imagine I have in my house a booklet, and the booklet tells me how I can crochet a talit bag. So I want you to imagine, you pick up this booklet, you're reading the instructions of crocheting a talit bag, okay? How intently focused are you when you read the manual of crocheting a talit bag? Probably, oh, it's interesting, I like to crochet, I want to do something for my grandson's bar mitzvah. This has now become de rigueur. People now feel that if they don't have a crocheted talit bag, like did the child even get bar mitzvah, right? Okay? On the other hand, I want you to compare that to a person, a pilot, who gets a instruction manual for a new plane that he's about to fly. I think if you and me are looking at something like that, we're looking at that manual in a very different way. Because you know what? If two of the pages are stuck together and I missed one page, the whole plane could go down. Is this clear? If two of the pages got stuck together, or if I went to get a coffee and I missed one section, I don't know how to land the plane. 300 people are going to die, including myself. The minute a person realizes that there's a ramification to not getting the instruction manual right, all of a sudden they're paying close attention. I have sometimes a chatan and kala that I'll have the privilege of learning with before they get married. You know, when you talk to a chatan and kala about shalom bayit and how to resolve conflict and how to love and how to give and how to give in, right, without giving up, chatan and kala sit there lovey-dovey, looking at each other. Every time you say the word, do you love your wife? They're like, it's very sweet. It's very lovely. Very different when they come to you in crisis. When they come in crisis and they say, Rabbi, we love each other, but this is not working. What are we supposed to do? How do we fix this? You know, when you go to a chinuch class, how to raise children. Very nice, nice idea. Rabbi said a nice story. But you can always tell the person who's got a child that they need this information for. That if they don't hear you right, then they don't know what they're going to do about the situation that they've got going on back at home. They're sitting in the class like this. Rabbi, no, what do you mean? When you say that you tell them like that, what do you mean? How should we say it? How does one say it? I'm asking for a friend. Classic, right? When someone has yirat chet, the level of intent, the level of focus, the level of excellence they strive for in understanding how a person lives the Torah way, the moral way, the correct way, is on a completely different stratosphere, never mind level. Okay? So what the Mishnah is telling us is that you want this to stick. Like, let's get real for a second. We're not messing around. This is not nice, fluffy things. This is life. You don't get it right, you don't get the life that you want to build for yourself. Both, like we said, in this world and the next. You're not hearing when the rabbi said that doing it this way is honest and right and just and moral and correct, and doing it this way is nothing short of stealing. You will become a thief. You know, you don't realize what the halacha is in certain medical scenarios. The doctor tells you do this, do that. Suddenly, you did something wrong. The Torah considers the person a murderer. You pulled the plug. You weren't allowed to. You shortened the life. You killed somebody. You see the point? And that's something that will haunt you if you don't. Making sure that we understand. If something is real, it has real ramifications. If something is a nice story, if it's a motivational speech, and that's all it is, then you know what? You're inspired and you're motivated when you get it. You got to the place because the guy told a nice story and a good joke. But does it penetrate? Does it reside in your heart? Will it be transmissible from you to your children? How is this going to be? That depends on the level of seriousness that the person takes it with. Rav Shwadron explains that that's why the Mishnah gives a dual lashon. If you have yirat chet, you're afraid you're going to get it wrong. If that's how you're looking at it, so then you know what? Chochmato mitkayemet. That wisdom, it's going to endure. It's going to last you your whole life. You know, you won't make the same mistakes after you learn to do things differently, because the wisdom that you learned, it will be there. How many times is a person in a difficult situation and all of a sudden they're thinking, I just heard a class about this, how to resolve this, how to get through this. I'm getting angry. There was some great tips that the rabbi had on anger in that class from 3 weeks ago. You know, you wish you would remember the things that you learned in those crucial moments. So how does a person get it? Rav Shwadron explains that the reason why we have a double lashon, you have the yirat chet, it sticks. You don't have it, it doesn't. He says, because one could have thought that yirat chet, this fear of heaven, this fear of getting making a mistake, one could have thought that that's like a safe. So you have your wisdom, you put it in the safe, that will make sure it doesn't get stolen. But not everything that isn't in a safe gets stolen. I mean, obviously we're not referring to if it's in a store today, anywhere in Manhattan. Now, if it's not in a safe, in a store, it's probably getting stolen. Unfortunately, there are animals outside that are using this opportunity to perpetrate less justice in the name of justice. I mean, it blows the mind, okay? So here you might have thought that this is like a safe to protect your wisdom, but actually he says it's not a safe. It's not a safe that protects the wisdom. That if you don't have it, you might lose it, you might not. If you don't have yirat chet, you're definitely losing it. That's why the Mishnah says it both ways. If you have it, you keep it. If you don't have it, don't misunderstand me, he says. Everything you learn will disappear. And you know when it disappears? Always when you need it the most. So you know what? You are a fountain of wisdom when it comes to being not judgmental and not speaking lashon hara and paying your workers on time and doing everything until it comes to the crucial moment when you need your wisdom. In those moments, suddenly the wisdom runs away. Why? Because it's not a safe yirat chet. It's a kli, it's a vessel. If you don't have the vessel, I could pour all the most beautiful nectar in the world into your bowl. But if there's no bowl, it's not like it might get ruined. It must get ruined. So I want to talk a little bit about what this means, this fear of heaven, and how that looks in life. You know, Sir Martin Gilbert, wrote a book called he wrote a masterpiece, beautiful, called The Holocaust. It is a definitive book on the history of the Holocaust, everything extensively and painstakingly researched, okay? Very difficult book to read. But he writes something which I found in some ways more difficult to read than the atrocities that are in the book. He writes that fully 1/3 of the commandants of the Nazi death camps, 1/3, were either MDs, they were medical doctors, or they had PhDs. These were not rednecks from the hills, you know, with the wife beaters, sitting there drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. These were doctors. These were PhDs. These were educated people. How could it be that that education didn't penetrate and allow them to recognize that they were committing the most heinous crime that had ever been committed in all of human history? How could that be? And the answer is because there is a wide gulf between education, between intelligence, between wisdom and morality. And that wisdom taking hold. Did the doctor sentencing the Jew to death, did the doctor doing it, the doctor with his thumb, did he forget his Hippocratic oath? He swore to do no harm. How did he do that? And the answer is that Yirat Chet'o was not Kodemet L'Chochmato. He had a lot of wisdom, but that wisdom wasn't couched in a fear of getting things wrong. You know what happens when you're afraid to get things wrong? You don't buy whatever somebody's selling you. You double check. You don't think that you are the arbiter of ethics and morality. You defer to someone who is an expert. People who are not afraid of getting things wrong, they make halachic decisions for themselves. People who are afraid of getting things wrong, they call and they ask their rabbi, let me explain, let me understand, how do we do this? What's the right thing to do? Do I push the wedding off or not push the wedding off? Do I name the baby? Do I have the brit today or have the brit later? Who's a good mohel to have for the child? What's the proper way to run a bar and bat mitzvah so that my children can understand that it's not just a party? Someone like that is taking this very seriously to the point that it's clear that they don't want to get it wrong. And because they don't want to get it wrong, that will ensure that they get it right. I always found this very, very interesting. As important as understanding what somebody says in Pirkei Avot is understanding who it is that says that bit of knowledge. So as an example, if someone like Martin Luther King says, life is very difficult, that's very different than if someone like Mark Zuckerberg says, life is very difficult. What do you think of when you say, if I told you Mark Zuckerberg today said life is very difficult? You're thinking, what a white privileged guy. He's one of the richest people in the whole world. Hazit, he has such a difficult life. You're dumping scorn on the guy because how difficult is his life? As important as what is being said is recognizing who it is that's saying it. Because the who gives us the context for the what. When Martin Luther King is talking about the life being difficult, he's talking about trying to run a non-violent protest, trying to keep the people motivated and positive and not to cross the lines, so to speak, because he felt, as an example, way back when, that this is something that needed to change. And how do you change the perception of an entire nation, of an entire world, okay? But there was always the fear of making sure that it was done right, okay? This Mishnah is being taught to us by Rav Chanina ben Dosa. And that's very important because it really helps us understand who it is that's telling us that you must be afraid. That Judaism, without a modicum of fear, and we'll describe what that word means in just a minute, if there's zero fear, if it's all, love, then it doesn't work. And I'll explain what I mean just a second. There was a time when Rav Yochanan he had his child that was unwell. So his wife came and she said, our daughter is unwell, why don't you go pray and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give her a refuah shlema. Rav Yochanan says to his wife, he says, go to my student, Rav Chanina ben Dosa, and ask him to pray for our daughter and she will be okay. She goes to the student, to Rav Chanina ben Dosa, she pours her mother's heart out, which is probably why Rav Yochanan sent her instead of him, so that Rav Chanina ben Dosa would be touched by the depth of her care, of her concern, of her sadness. And Rav Chanina ben Dosa prays, and the child gets better. Comes evening, and Rav Yochanan's wife is sitting at the dinner table, so to speak, and she says, I'm surprised. You're the rabbi. You're the teacher. He's the student. Is the student's prayers stronger than his rabbi's? Powerful question. Rav Yochanan answers, he says, I don't think you understand. He says, in the heavenly court, I am like an official. I'm an elderly sage. I've spent my whole life, working at this. I'm a government official. I'm a senator, so to speak. When the senator needs to speak to the king, he has to make an appointment. If he barges in to the throne room, there's a big problem, because he didn't make an appointment. He doesn't just come in whenever he wants. He says, but Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is like a servant of the king. The servant of the king, the chambermaid, whoever it is, they walk into the king's bedroom whenever they want. They fix the sheets, they do whatever they want. The king actually there's a very comfortable, so to speak, relationship, a loving relationship, if you will, almost, with a very close chambermaid that you tell all your secrets to, that you're connected with. Rabbi Yochanan explained to his wife, as he said, there's no question that with all of my years, I've developed something with God. But Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa has this loving, simpler relationship. It will develop over time, but he can go into God whenever he wants. And I always thought about that idea, where Yochanan was saying to his wife, it was nice, he didn't say, yes, his tefillah is better. He said, my tefillah is stronger. But you need something immediately. Who has that access? He has that access. He has a closer, so to speak, relationship, a simpler relationship with God than I do. Very powerful idea that needs a lot of thought and digestion. But I thought to myself, if of all the people, Rav Chanina ben Dosa is telling us that when you study Torah, it has to be with a certain sense of fear and awe, it means that even he is telling us this. There are many parents that exhibit tremendous love to their children. And they tell their kids to call them by their first names. And they tell their kids, whatever you want, whenever you want. There's no boundaries between the parent and the child. What the parents don't often realize is that the breakdown of those boundaries, the fact that they feel they have more love, but not as much respect or awe or fear of their parents, like the Torah says, Ish imo ve'aviv tira'u, you have to fear your parents. If you don't have that, then when the parent needs to say something that the child can only hear because of authority. So as an example, let's say the child wants to go do something X. The parent says, this is very bad for you. I don't want you to go out and do X. The child says, okay, you have one vote, I have one vote, stalemate, tiebreaker goes to me. Tie goes to the runner, right? When a parent needs to exert authority, they need to say, trust me, I have more life experience than you. I love you as much or more than you love yourself. Don't go. If you broke down the barrier between parent and child, first name basis, best friends, we tell each other everything. I have crazy cases as a rabbi that come to me where mothers are sharing with their daughters completely inappropriate details of the most intimate elements of their relationship with their father. I mean, it's mad. That is insane. It is unhealthy. It's not kavod. It's not proper respect. And as well, it also breaks down this kind of parent-child dynamic. And I always say this. Lots of parents want to be their child's friends. Your kids can have many friends. They only have one set of parents. Don't rob them of their parents to give them something that they can have many of at the expense of something that they only have two of. Okay? So too is the relationship between a human being and Borei Olam and God. If a person thinks that Judaism is all about love, and Hashem loves me no matter what I do, and then what happens is they rob themselves of the recognition that there are ramifications to their deeds. In Christianity, a person can do whatever they want. They can do because Jesus died for their sins, and ultimately they're just going to get their forgiveness by believing in Jesus. That's how Christianity works. Because human beings, they can't be trusted to do mitzvot. They can't be trusted to not do averot. The human being, the flesh is weak. That's what Christianity teaches. In Judaism, we don't believe in that. We believe that you and you alone have to do the Torah. And if you don't, there's payback. Positive for mitzvot, negative for averot. This is part of what the Torah teaches us. That doesn't mean it isn't loving. When you give your child ramifications, if they do their homework, don't do their homework. If they get good grades or don't get good grades, you tell them, I want to do something for you, but you need to show me that you're responsible and you're going to deal with it responsibly. Ramifications don't mean a lack of love. So says the Mishnah, hold on. I want you to study and I want you to learn. But if you think Torah is fluffy and nice and inspirational, if that's what you think it is, then you're not going to take it seriously and it won't last inside of you. Because you know what? Inspiration, I call it inspiration junkies. When you're an inspiration junkie, what are you looking for? The next inspiring quote. You're looking for another inspiring class. Meanwhile, as I've said many times over this coronavirus time, it would be better that we went to less classes and learned more than go to too many classes and just distract ourselves with so many ideas and actually not put in any work at having those classes change us. Okay? Now, seeing as that is true, Rabotai, I want to take a deviate, if you will, to what is going on around us today. I live in Manhattan, and last night was a scary night. The sirens did not stop. There was choppers overhead, almost the whole night. You kept hearing the sounds of screaming. This is what was going on 3rd Avenue, on Lexington, as store after store after store was vandalized. Okay? And as I said to you, scary to read the book, The Holocaust, and to realize, you know what? These disasters, these atrocities can occur. You know what's scarier than that in the book? What's scarier is to realize who it was that was committing the atrocities. Why? Because you know what the answer always is. What's the answer to terrorism? More bombs? No. Shooting more people? No. You know why? Because you shoot more people, the terrorists get more angry, and what happens after that? They then attack with more fervor, they teach their kids more hatred, and more people are strapping on a bomb and going on a bus. The only way to solve terrorism, what do we know, is by education. We know that. If they're teaching them as children to be terrorist bombers, then it's very unlikely that you're ever going to be able to win the war or to turn that tide. Okay? That is incredibly important. So to recognize that if we can teach them that what they're being taught is mind control, is brainwashing, and we can show them the facts that actually they don't have to die to have a good life. That actually they can get an education and get a good job and figure out a way to make ends meet for themselves. That is actually the best way for them to get what they want. The mayor yesterday, African-American mayor, I think from Atlanta, she's begging the people. She says, what are you doing? You want to change this? Go and flipping vote. That's how you change this. Put people in positions of authority that will fight for your interests in the courts, that will ensure that the things that you want to get done, you'll see them done. No one is changing anything because you stole a diamond out of Graf. No one is changing anything for you because you stole TVs from Best Buy. How do you think that this is going to do anything? Okay? So education is key. And what made it so scary, that book, was to think that here were people with education who still committed the most heinous of crimes. So I'm reading yesterday in the newspaper, and you read incredibly eloquent writers from the far left. And that to me is more terrifying than the sirens at night. More terrifying than the choppers above. When eloquent writers will justify not only looting and stealing and damaging and blowing up police cars, but the shooting of police officers, where they will say that that is okay and that that is a valid form of doing this. The officer you shot without judge or jury had nothing to do with what went on with George Floyd in those terrible, terrible, terrible final moments. And you're not changing anything by doing so. If you think that police officers are going to have a better view and a version of African Americans when more of their people are being shot in the streets, when their hands are being tied, it's not how you change this. So what we're being taught over here is unbelievable. You see a guy like that, incredibly eloquent, could write maybe in a way that maybe none of us in this chat can write, okay? When you see that, that is terrifying, because it is there that you see that this is a man who was educated in a liberal college somewhere where they are able to justify any crime, when they can use their education not to further the sense of justice, further the sense of peace, quiet what's going on, but to rile the lowest elements of society, not black or white, but the violent, uneducated. And they can give them a kosher stamp. You know, so long as you think that something is wrong, there's a chance to be able to dial it back. But if you think that something is right, that what you're doing is freedom fighting, that putting a bullet in a random police officer's head is going to solve this problem, and that's going to make a better life for your children, then what chance do we have of moving forward? Is this clear? The Mishnah is begging us. Rav Chanina ben Dosa, who was a man of great love, he said, you have to understand. Love is wonderful. Understanding is amazing. Not being judgmental, divine, fantastic. But if we cannot call a spade, if when police officers are in a car and de Blasio needs to play political gymnastics, he needs to move back and forth, and he can't say that the police officers in the car were being surrounded by a mob. Look at what went on over there. There's people throwing things at the car. The police chief showed after de Blasio told the police officer he wants his gun and his badge, right? What did he say? The police officer came on and he said, there was a brick through the window. This is what his own officer, his friend, had just had. So you're in a situation where you're trying to police, and what happens? Ultimately, you tear down the police, you tear down law and order. Do you think that in the absence of law and order, a better law and order will emerge? Have we learned nothing? In the absence of law and order, what happens? We learned in the Mishnah already. The Mishnah says, Ilav mora malchut, if not for the fear of government, if not for the fear of the king, so to speak, of the power in charge, ish et chavero chaim belao, a man will swallow up his friend alive. You want this to change? Put political pressure so that the system changes. One more cop. If they shot that cop in the head, they should not do so. But if they killed the cop that did this, did the problem go away? If the problem is in the system. You kill one terrorist, does that do anything? You know what? 7 more come up in its place. It's the head, it's Hydra. You know, you cut off one head of a snake, 7 more come in its place. And you know what? Now the terrorist you killed, spawned 7 more, because now they're even angrier that you killed that guy. I'm not saying that person, a murderer, should not be stopped when he's killing innocent men, women, and children. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it is naive to believe that is going to solve the problem. That's what I'm saying. So what the Mishnah is teaching us, that if we want to create enduring change, what do we need to do? We need to recognize that whatever I think and whatever you think quite often is already being motivated by partisan interests. To think that you could tell the black community how they should think and how they should react when you're a white guy, living without what they're going through right now in this country is a little bit presumptuous. It is. There's no question, right? So just recognize, says the Mishnah, that if you're speaking from your own education, from your own life experience, it's going to be colored, number one, by the way you see things, but also, number two, by the way you want the situation to be resolved. Isn't that clear to everybody? Says the Mishnah, I need some fear of heaven. You need to be afraid that you might get this wrong. When it came to coronavirus, so I remember that everyone was trying to figure out, when do we shut the synagogues? How do we shut the synagogues? And we shut our synagogue on the day that we did, whenever it was. Someone asked me, are you not afraid of getting this wrong? And I said, no, I'm not afraid. I know I got it right. Does that sound arrogant? Sure it does. Except that there's one caveat. I didn't say that I'm not afraid of getting it wrong because I'm not afraid of getting it wrong. There was a great doctor who was practicing next door to synagogue. His name is Matthew Dunell. God bless him. Okay, his professional angle in the medical community is in epidemiology and in public health. He was born for this time. Okay, so I called him up on the phone and I said, "Give us your guidance. When do you think we should open? When do you think we should close? What prerequisites do we need to put into place? How old is the oldest person we should let in? How old the youngest? What do we need to do? How do we clean? Which cleaning materials?" When you're recognizing that you don't have an answer, then you reach out and you find the person that does. That's what it means, yirat chet'o. And you know why I wasn't arrogant enough to make that decision by myself as a rabbi, as a leader in the community? Because I was terrified of getting it wrong. What happens if you didn't put the right thing into place and then, God forbid, someone passed away because of your hubris, because of your mistake, because you wanted to show everyone that you were strong or you were a powerful leader or you acted decisively or whatever the case might be? I was terrified to get it wrong, not to get sued. I was terrified to get it wrong. The damage, the human price. When you're terrified to get it wrong, you don't resort to mob psychology, because you see what happens when mobs form. There's enough been written about that in psychology for us to understand that these things, all the time, they go wrong, because no one is actually thinking from an expert point of view. And almost always, if you're paying attention to the news, the people who are trying to run these protests are begging people for this to be peaceful. And yet, inevitably, it's going wrong. And as much as the media is trying to spin this, the protests are peaceful, but the looting is not. You can't separate the two. You can't separate the two. You're bringing all these people together with all of this anger. What do you think is going to happen when every single time this happens, this seems to be the result? Could you imagine, as an example, if you were smart enough to recognize, if you were clever enough to recognize that this was going to happen, so the people leading the protests actually should coordinate this with the city. This is when we're going to go. This is the time. And if the largest body of people are moving in a certain way, that's what yirat chet'o does. You're sending your child to a school. All the time I have this. Parent will decide, I'm sending my child to school. Why? It's the closest one. This one's cheaper. My friends are sending it. This is a life decision. Do you have the background to make this choice? Maybe speak to an educational psychologist. Maybe speak to teachers of the school, rabbis. Some parents agonize over this, and they're right. I'm not saying once you made your decision, you made your decision. You don't need to keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But at the same time, it's so important to be able to understand, to be able to recognize clearly the importance of your decision. Now, Lisa Herman is saying you can separate the two. Terrorists and protesters and vandals are not the same. No one is saying they are. What I'm saying is if you're organizing a mass protest and you know that vandals are taking advantage of your protest to loot the stores, it is irresponsible to pretend that that is not going to happen. That's the nikudah that we're saying here. So what are you putting into, again, and I must say this, when there's looting happening everywhere, there's protests in every single major city. So if you're trying to create systemic change, your protest might actually do the opposite and increase hatred and increase racism. So if your aim is, if your motivation is to change that, you have to be able to build in contingency plans. Now, in many cases, as I've said many times, a lot of the protesters are standing in circles around police officers that are being beaten, in front of stores. They're standing with hands to try and protect the stores. It's amazing, amazing that is happening. But at the same time, that is happening in an ad hoc way, where people's lives are being put in danger, both the peaceful protesters and the police that are trying to do their job, right? That's a problem. When the protesters are shouting, right? Not just no justice, no peace, but when they're shouting, kill the pigs. Even if it's a peaceful protest, you're whipping up the most incendiary element of people's hearts, okay? And there's no question of the majority in any given protest might be doing A, but to ignore the opposite is simply, it's irresponsible. And I want to speak to that one point, and I'll end with this because I want to kind of finish the class off together. I want to end with one more point. Lots of shuls had permission to open when the governor gave permission to open whatever it was last week. The government said synagogues can open with 10 people. But you know what? Many rabbis and many communities did not open their shuls even though they were allowed to. Why did they do that? Why did they do that, Lisa? You know what the answer is? Because when they did it last time, you know what happened? They said 10, and then 12 came, and then 15 came. And then when they told the 15 they only allowed 10, they said, come on, I'm not leaving now. You don't have a second minyan. Are you understanding this? Are you understanding this? So when you have a scenario where you recognize that people are not going to keep the rules, so they didn't open the shuls this time, they kept them locked. Because it is the responsibility of someone who's afraid of getting something wrong to do it in the best possible way. And by the way, I don't know if you're listening, Lisa, I've given 3 or 4 shiurim already. I've spoken a lot about those peaceful protesters, except I think you're focusing only on this one point. And I think to deny it is not doing anybody any favors. This is a part and parcel of what it means when you pull everyone on the street. It is. So if you're not going to pay attention to it, then you're just denying the inevitable. One element does not have anything to do with taking the culpability and placing the responsibility of that on the president or on the police when it is necessary, but also on the people who are doing this when it is necessary. So let's wrap this up. Rev Leib Chasman points out something unbelievable. The pasuk says when Lisa, I'm happy to speak it through. Fully, but obviously I can't have a conversation just with you in the middle of a class about this. And I think as time has gone on, I think I have provided a very balanced approach. If you disagree, you're obviously entitled to. I'm not denying anything. I've talked about respecting and the tragedy of what it was. I don't know if it's fair that I am not bringing up the whole picture, but I'm happy to speak to you later about it. Okay? Now, the amazing thing of what Rav Leib brings up is he says that in the pasuk we find that when Paro commanded that the Jewish babies should be killed, the pasuk tells us that there were 2 women who stood up against the decree. Who was it? One person who stood up against the decree was Miriam, and the other was Yocheved. They were the people who were helping give birth, the mother's helpers, if you will, the nurses, the miyaldot, they were the doulas, they were helping the women give birth, and they went in and instead of killing the babies like Paro commanded them to do, which was a terrible risk to their own lives, what did they do? Instead, they went in, v'techayena et hayeladim. They kept the children alive. Okay? God saw, thank you, the midwives. God saw that these midwives were doing X. Let's see what the pasuk says. Vayas lahem batim, and he rewarded them with house of kihuna. He gave the house of kihuna to Yocheved, who was the mother of Aharon, and he gave the house of milucha, of kingship, to Miriam, who was through the tribe of Yehuda, would become the mother of all the kings of the Jewish people. Okay, so these 2 great dynasties were granted to these 2 women. Why? Because they, what? What do you think the pasuk should have said? It should have said that the midwives saved the children. Because the midwives saved the children, because they risked their lives, they were rewarded. It doesn't say that. It says, Vaya, and Hashem saw, right? The Pasuk says, the Pasuk says, Vayehi ki yaru miyaledot. And he saw that the miyaledot were afraid et Elokim of God. Vayas lahem batim. And he made for them houses. Why in the world would the Pasuk say that they were rewarded because of their fear of heaven? Why doesn't it say that they were rewarded because they saved the lives of the babies? Because they were not afraid to risk their own lives. Why doesn't it say that? And Reb Leib Chasman gives an incredible answer. And he says as follows. He says that when it comes to reward for a mitzvah, there can be two people who are doing things that seem identical. So you have Reuven, he helps out a poor person who's hungry, he gives him something to eat. You have Shimon, helps out a poor person who's hungry, he gives him something to eat. One of them could be rewarded in they could get some sort of temporary reward, and one could be rewarded in a way where it's eternal. The gift that God gave to Miriam and Yocheved was forever. Eternally Kehunah would be through her. Eternally Milucha, kingship, would be through her. Why were they given an eternal reward? You know, I read this unbelievable story from Rav Ephraim Shapiro. You know, there was a man in his synagogue in the heat of summer. They had a kiddush, and you guys remember what that was, a kiddush? Everyone got together in close quarters and they ate food, right? Disaster now during our time, but this used to exist. And he noticed that they gave out ice cream on this boiling hot day, and everyone is enjoying it tremendously, okay? And there's one person not eating ice cream. So he said to this guy, he goes, aren't you eating the ice cream? He goes, no. He says, you are on a diet? He goes, Rabbi, no, look, I'm trim. You know, that's not for a diet. He says, so why are you doing this? He says, I'll tell you the truth. Rabbi, a long time ago, you were talking about when you see somebody in pain, one of the things that a person is supposed to do is to try and take on that person's pain to whatever degree they can. To try and feel what that person is going through. Noseh be'ol im chavero. To carry the burden with somebody's friend. Okay? Now, what's fascinating about this? Fascinating. Okay? To me, I think, and as well, I think it will to you as well. Okay? He said, I decided then that there's all of these attacks in Israel going on. I feel terrible about what's going on in Israel. He says, but there's nothing I could do. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a rich man. I can't send them money. I can't, help out. I can't go enlist. What can I do? So he says, I thought maybe just to do something that would make me remember. Just something. He says, I love ice cream, especially in the summer. And I decided that until the situation gets better, I'm not going to eat ice cream. The rabbi says, when did I give the speech? The man says, I think it was in the summer of the Intifada. Wait, in 2000. The guy hadn't eaten ice cream since, in order that there should be something that reminds him of the fact that we do not have peace in Eretz Israel. Remarkable. Think about that kind of a sensitivity that someone could have. Remarkable, right? He carries on and he says something that was even more beautiful. He mentions that one of the members of his shul came and told him a story. He said that I was walking past my child and she was cleaning the dishes, and all of a sudden, the news came on, and the news said that there was there was a challenge with, someone that had been captured, and they wasn't able to come back, and finally at the end, the prisoners were released. And his daughter said to herself quietly, she said, oh, Baruch Hashem, thank God. Thank God, she says. Why? She says, no, it's nothing. He says, why? She says, it's nothing. Why? She says, I promised myself that until the soldiers came home, they were released from captivity, I wouldn't sleep with my pillow. I guess I could use my pillow again. The rabbi said, Do you know whose daughter it was that wouldn't use her pillow? Right? Do you know whose daughter that was? Do you know which type of a person, excuse me, do you know which type of a person has a child who gives birth to a daughter that has the sensitivity to say, I'm not going to use my pillow because someone in the other side of the world it doesn't have theirs? It's the man who wouldn't eat the ice cream who has the daughter who won't use the pillow. When a person is doing something, not because they simply have some sort of empathy, but because they recognize that this is the right thing to do, that Borei Olam, God has given us this divine document teaching us to get and to instill in our lives these unbelievable elements of justice, of kindness, of correct learning. When you learn like that, and I have to say, it's great that someone is challenging me here in this class, because this is someone who's trying to get it right. And if it doesn't sound exactly right, she's asking, well, what about this and what about that? To just sit back is sometimes illustrative of the fact that a person might be just kind of cruising through a class, okay? So the refinement of that idea is very, very important. So here, we're finding this idea. It wasn't something that lasted only with him. It was something that endured and passed on to his children. When the Miyaledot did it, not just because they said, oh, babies are cute, not just because they were stubborn, not because they were anarchists and they weren't listening to the king, but because God himself could look in their heart and say, it was because they had fear of heaven, because they wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to feel like they had done that which was right, correct, just, etc. That was something that God was going to reward them with and have that endure throughout all of their children's lives, forever and ever, with the houses of Kehuna and the houses of Malchut. Us as Jews, God asks us when he gives us the Torah to be Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, to be a kingdom of priests. These two things, kings and priests, that were given to them, is something that God says, I want to give to every single Jew that learns Torah. But in order to do that, V'atem tihiyu li, it has to be that we're doing the mitzvot for the right reasons, not for honor, not even for the simplest element of compassion. Because sometimes we can have compassion on people where that compassion is actually out of place. To have compassion on a murderer, as an example, the Mishnah says, Kol hamerachem achzarim, sofo lehitachzer ala rahmanim. You have mercy on someone who is cruel. In the end, you were cruel to someone that you should have been kind to. You think back to the time when the church was helping Nazis escape. It's unbelievable. Now is when you're choosing to get involved. Now is when you're choosing to help people escape. I mean, it's heartbreaking. But at the same time, Rabotai, what I hope that each and every one of us understands is that when we think we've got the balance correct in our life, ask again. Play devil's advocate with yourself, okay? What that means is, when you think you have it right and you're sure that your opinion is correct, just ask this simple question. But what if I'm wrong? What if I haven't seen it from the other perspective? What if someone hasn't argued with me? What if the only people I'm listening to are people within my own echo chamber? So all I'm doing is repeating the comments and the thoughts of those people around me who are in my life experience, who are in my situation, but actually don't understand the people that are coming from somewhere else, which brings us back to yesterday's class of the absolute obligation that we have to ensure between you and me that we are paying close attention to the perspective of others, to the perspective of people and a community that is hurting right now. And that is the perspective of the majority, so to speak, of the peaceful protesters. That is where they are coming from. Okay, they're coming from pain. They're coming from years of violence perpetrated against them. They're coming from years of racism, and that is a fact that if you deny, you're simply rewriting history. Okay? So to have this balance, you have to ask, at the end when you formulated your opinion, what if I've got it wrong? Sometimes it's easy to err on the side of compassion. Sometimes it's easy to err on the side of law and order. And as I'm fond of saying, when it comes to trying to find emet, emet is spelled of 3 letters. Aleph, mem, taf. Aleph is the first letter. Taf is the last letter. Because you want to seek emet, the third letter of emet is mem, is the middle letter of the aleph bet. You want to know where emet lies. It's probably not with this polar opposite, and it's probably not with this polar opposite. Emet probably lies almost always somewhere in between the 2 sides. But if you're not afraid of getting it wrong, almost always you'll choose your comfortable side. That's what this Mishnah is teaching us, okay? And that kind of chokhmah, which is real, which is genuine, is something that winds up enduring, not just throughout your life, but throughout the life of your children and your children's children as God builds you homes of kings, of priests, of just, of purpose, of meaningful life for you and your entire families. Hazaku Baruch, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. God bless. Peace out. Sorry to the Instagram crew.